So we'll talk a little bit about the idea of celebrating and celebrating Thanksgiving. There are some contradicting opinions. Some people say are in favor, some are are against it. So when we look historically at how Jews interacted with the government that they were under, we find that even at the time of Galut Bavel and under King Nebuchadnezzar, there was a prophecy delivered to the Jews by Yirmiyahu, and he says, "Benu batim v'shevu v'nit'u ganot v'yichlu et piryan." He says, you should build homes for yourselves, plant gardens. He also tells them that get married, have children, and prosper in this country. V'dirshu. So part of it of this, the reason why Yirmiyahu had to tell it to people is because they thought, a lot of Jews thought, we're going to go back to Eretz Israel soon. There's no point in establishing ourselves in exile. So even though Yirmiyahu also, Yeshayahu actually promises that the Galut will end within 70 years, so people really would have this mentality, we're going to go back in 70 years, so why bother to settle where we are? What Yirmiyahu says is very interesting in the sense of, he tells people, even though you're now exiles, but don't put yourself in a state of mind of misery. Do not remain refugees, as we know that other nations. It's in this modern age, the Palestinians chose to do. Their leaders chose to leave them in that situation. He says, do not be refugees. Try to establish yourselves as much as possible. Try to be in a good state of mind and in a positive attitude, because that will give you strength when you want to get up and go back, when you need to do that. And he adds also, "V'dirshu et shalom ha'ir asher eglek etchem shama," and make sure that the city or place where you live is always safe and that you are loyal to them. V'itpalelu ba'adai l'Adonai, and pray for that city or that government to Hashem. Ki bishloma yeh lachem shalom. Because with the well-being of that state, you will also prosper. It's a very interesting insight that goes, it's for 2,300 years since that was written. And in every election cycle, when we come to that, you hear in the Jewish community, people saying, who is better for Israel? This one or that one? Who is better for the Jews? Who is better for Israel? If they would have asked the Navi Yirmiyahu, he would have told them, Ki bishloma yeh lachem shalom. Whoever is better for America is better for Israel, because with a strong country where you live, especially with this kind of relationship, this is how you're going to prosper. So this is what Yirmiyahu says, and that is amazing, because this is under the rule of Babylonia, which we call Malchut HaRish'ah, destroyed the temple, exiled hundreds of thousands of people, killed hundreds of thousands of people. Yet Yirmiyahu says, pray for the well-being of Bavel. Hachamim, also the rabbis in Masechet Avot, followed suit and said, but this is from a different perspective. They say, לעולם הווה מתפלל בשלומה של מלכות, שאלמלא מוראה איש את רעהו חיים בלעו. It says you have to always pray for the welfare of the government, because if not for the fear or the reverence of the government, people would swallow each other alive. And now interesting is that the one who says that is Rabbi Hanina Segan HaKohanim in Masechet Avot. His name is Rabbi Hanina Segan HaKohanim, or the deputy high priest. But it's not a deputy high priest, it's the deputy of the high priests in plural. So one of the commentators explained why was he called Rabbi Hanina Segan HaKohanim, is only the deputy of the high priest. He says because he should have been promoted at a certain point to become the high priest. If he was the second in command, right? At a certain point he should be promoted. The answer is he was not promoted because he was a traditionalist. He was an observant Jew and a learned person, and the high priests were appointed by the government, by the Greek and then Roman government, and they always bypassed him. Always took someone who was not knowledgeable but had political ties, to the extent that in Masechet Yoma, the same Rabbi Hanina Segan HaKohanim says, when they speak about what the Kohen Gadol had to do Erev Kippur, the night before Kippur, they didn't want him to sleep. He had to be alert. So Rabbi Haina Sagan HaKohanim says, "Harbe pe'amim kariti lefanav b'Daniel." There are many times that when I spent time with the Kohen Gadol, I had to keep him awake. On the night before Kippur, I would read with him the book of Daniel. What is the point of this comment? Why do we have to know what you read? We read magazines, we read Shulchan Aruch. Why the book of Daniel? He wanted, this is a hidden message. He wants to tell you that the Kohen Gadol could not speak Hebrew. There was such a political appointment. They took someone who only spoke the vernacular, which was Aramaic, so he could only understand the book of Daniel. So the same Rabbi Haina Sagan HaKohanim is someone who's learned, who's in the center of power in the Beit HaMikdash, but keeps being passed by, for political reasons. He could have held a grudge against the government and say, this is a terrible government, it destroys religion, it destroys the Jewish people, you should pray for them to be annihilated. Instead, what does he say? You have to realize that even such a government is better than no government, which is something that in modern times, I think we've learned over and over again. The historians and sociologists say that when you try to replace an oppressive regime, you have to have a sort of like a full-fledged regime or government to replace it. If you don't have it, chaos will reign, and this is what happens. So it says that we need at least that fear of the punishment of the government keeps people at check to not destroy each other. So you have to pray for them, and that was the practice really in all of our different places in diaspora. We always prayed for the well-being and the welfare of the government, what we call Shloma Shel Malchut. It's and interestingly enough, the tefillah that we use today, Hanoten Teshu'a LaMelachim, that we have in the Sidurim, that's the official. Before that, there was a nusach that starts with Mishe Berach, like our regular Mishe Berach. The first time that this version is found, Hanoten Teshu'a LaMelachim, is from a Sidur from Spain, and it was written in honor of King Fernando. Ironically, those are the same kings, the Catholic kings who signed the decree of expulsion against the Jews of Spain, and they wrote the tefillah in his honor. And there, if you search through the archives of Jewish literature, you'll find prayers in honor of the Tsar, of Franz Joseph of Austria, of Wilhelm of Germany, and all the other. Sometimes at the same time, simultaneously, Jews on one side of the border prayed for one emperor, and Jews on the other side prayed for another. There's actually an anecdote from the time of the Austro-Hungarian War that shows the predicament in which Jews were, and they say that a commander of one of the warring sides declared he's going to give a reward to anyone who captures an enemy soldier, and one of his soldiers, who was a Jew, comes towards nighttime with 9 captives. The commander is like, wow, this is amazing. You say, that you're so courageous and valiant. Okay, gives them rewards for 9 people. The next day, towards night, he comes again with 9 people. And so the third day, he says, this is amazing. He says, whatever, Moshe probably, right? How did you do that? He says, very easy. I go to the border. I says, I need to say Kaddish. So 9 people come over. I need a minion, right? So because there were Jews on both sides, and they had to fight each other. So praying for the government, they always do that. So now that we live in a country, at least we could say that about the United States of America, a country that was benevolent and supportive of Jews and the state of Israel. Yes, there were exceptions. We're not saying New Amsterdam was under Dutch administration was not very favorable towards the Jews. There were, even in the 20th century, there were places in Los Angeles. There was a hospital, Cedars Hospital, would not admit Jews. The sweet revenge is that now this hospital is called Cedar Sinai, and it's all sponsored by Jewish money in the Chevrolet, and of course it admits Jews. My daughter was born there, but we had those difficult times where even the United States of America did not support Israel fully with its wars or whatever. But there's no comparison to what we went through with other governments around the world, even today, even in the 20th century. So as a token of that, of our recognition, acknowledgement, Jews living in America, whether they're citizens or not, should participate. If either they celebrate it themselves or they're invited over, and they go to friends who celebrate it with the traditional foods that are. And also interesting that this whole idea of the seder of Thanksgiving, you could say that somewhere deep within the subconscious of whoever decided this will be the holiday, whether it was the Puritans or someone else that made a tradition. Abraham Lincoln made it into a tradition, but they had the memory of the Pesach, the idea of how we celebrate Leil HaSeder with foods that remind us of the exile and all that. So there were voices in modern American Jewish orthodoxy who were against it, who said you cannot celebrate Thanksgiving, and their main claim was that it's called Hukot HaGoyim, the ways of the non-Jews, which you should not follow. But this argument is really does not hold water. It's not has no foundation, because in many different occasions the rabbis discuss. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef discusses customs that where we imitate the non-Jews. And he says, if they have a logical basis, then there's no problem, because you're doing it because it makes sense, not because it's an idolatrous tradition. So, for example, people who used to wear black clothes during mourning, right? Rabbi Yosef says it's okay, because the dark color is something that is associated for many people with the mourning, or putting flowers on the grave. There's like things that some people were against because they say it's Hukot HaGoyim. He said it's not a problem. So obviously here, this is even though it's a religious holiday, I mean it has a religious element, but it's really a national holiday, and the people of each religion could choose which God or what concept of God they have in mind where they are being thankful. So there's no, it's mitzvah to do that. And I think it's Kiddush Hashem also, because for a non-Jew to think, you as a Jew do not celebrate either 4th of July or Thanksgiving, and the not national holidays, you show that you're not part of this country. So
it's also a celebration of Sephardic kashrut.
Right. A celebration of Sephardic kashrut, because the Sephardim had no problem with eating turkey, whereas Ashkenazim had problems they weren't sure if they had tradition on that. Yes?
There had always been a tradition of wanting to have some kind of Thanksgiving to
Yes.
God for all the country, Abraham, George Washington.
Right.
But Lincoln set the date, and he set the date to celebrate the victory at Gettysburg. Mm-hmm. It was a celebration of the Union's first major victory in the Civil War.
Right, so that's interesting, because I mentioned this here in the writing. It says that even with the founding fathers established America on the values of Torah, they even wanted the Hebrew to be a language, an official language of the United States of America. It should have been great when thinking about coming to teach Tanakh or private schools. We didn't have like Hebrew schools and all that. Didn't work. But one of the great things that we see about the history of the United States is how, despite the original history of slavery, they were able to rise above that, abolish slavery, and correct that. And that is in the spirit of what Torah describes as Tzelem Elokim. All humans were created in the image of God. So that in itself shows the greatness of that country. And another thing that someone mentioned to me, which is true concern, is that he said we should not celebrate the day because Native Americans were slaughtered, decimated by the white men, and this is true. It did happen. It is not. It is a shameful chapter in American history. Not only during the wars where people were killed, even after there were treaties and agreements, there was an attempt to force Native Americans to forget their language and heritage and force them to only speak English. And sometimes in very cruel manners, kids were separated from their parents. The Indian schools, right, Native Americans. So, but it still does not mean that we don't celebrate the idea of finding refuge in America from the oppressive regimes, religious, non-religious, of the old world, and of America being a safe haven for the Maranos, for other people who needed at times of war to come and settle here. So one has to balance both. It's good to mention when you sit around the table to bring up that issue of what happened to Native Americans, to say that we have to remember that and help in any way possible to amend the situation, whether by physically contributing, connecting to people, or any other way. And I think Rabbi David Di Solapur was the first one who, maybe not the first one, but he created this official service that could be found online and recommended to say some Mizmorei Tehillim like we did today. One could write his own prayer, say a prayer, but the idea of the two ideas are combined. One, that we have to praise and thank Hashem for all the good that He did for us, and second, that we have to show loyalty and acknowledgement and gratitude to the country where we live, in this case the United States of America, that we have to appreciate that. So happy Thanksgiving to all, and to those who ask vegetarian, you could fulfill the mitzvah with a tofu turkey or vegetables.
The other minhag of Turkey is go out to the parade at the end of the tefillah.
All right, yeah, that's a good minhag, right?